If you read my memoir, Fugitive Days, it's one long description of regret. I mean, anyone who's read it would see that in many ways it's a story of, well, it's a memoir, so it's not a manifesto, it's not a history, but it's an attempt to understand why did a kid like this end up in a place like that. But there's regret after regret, and if I were to name the regrets today, of course, it would start with the death of my girlfriend and two very, very dear friends in an accidental explosion in Greenwich Village. The carelessness of that, the stupidity of that would be where I'd begin. But then I'd go much deeper, and I would say our inability to end the war, our inability to impact that, led to an awful lot of rigid thinking, dogmatism, sectarianism, and if I were to do it all over, I would wish that I had the wisdom to be more unifying, to be more intelligent, to be more thoughtful. And what I've been quoted saying again and again, and I'll say it here, we didn't do enough. And what that means is we weren't effective enough, we weren't smart enough, we weren't unifying enough, we weren't flexible enough to be as effective as we might have been. I have heard this this idea that somehow the Weather Underground or Bernardine Dohrn or myself was involved in the killing of a police officer, and there's no truth to it. There's no evidence of it, and it's absolutely and flatly not true. We never considered such a thing. We never participated in such a thing. We never did such a thing. So no, it's a kind of tempest in a teapot stirred up by, I think, quite an incredible cast of characters, as I understand it. It's coming out of the blogosphere, it's coming out of that kind of space. You learned, for example, during the McCarthy era, that apologizing was never enough. You had to prostrate yourself and go through the ritual of apology again and again. And then that wasn't enough. What you had to do was to name names and say who else you saw at what meeting. So I don't actually believe, I think in our culture, the kind of going on Oprah is only the beginning of saying you're sorry. And since I actually have a more complicated view of it, that is, I have, in my view, a more honest view of it, it's hard for me to stand up and apologize for something that I'm not sorry for in the way that Oprah would approve of. The reason we're still stuck in Vietnam is that we never resolved it as a country, as a culture. The history of Vietnam is not something that we've settled on. This is the last political campaign where you're going to see the bloody shirt of the 1960s waved on a banner, and we're going to try to vote on that because I think it was ineffective. I think that for most people, certainly for people under 40, it doesn't have any resonance.